Good afternoon, Wesleyan. Woo! Excited to be here, excited to see everyone in the house today, and certainly want to extend greetings to all alumni, to all students, faculty, and friends of Wesleyan University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 19th Annual Dwight L. Greene Symposium. I am Janelle Davis, class of '99. I am the Black Alumni Council Chair. It is an honor to be here this evening and to share in the memory of such a prominent, well-respected, and beloved fellow alumni, Dwight Greene. This symposium honors Dwight L. Greene, class of '70, as a memorial tribute to his life and to his work as a professor of law, mentor, and friend. This event is sponsored by the Black Alumni Council and the Wesleyan Alumni of Color Network. The presenters are selected every year from among Wesleyan's alumni, faculty, and friends who have distinguished themselves in their profession. In the words of Evans Jacobs, Jr., class of '73, one of Dwight's closest friends, Dwight's great ability to network and to do for others was the spark that inspired this symposium. As a student, he was an energetic leader and often served as a spokesperson for the student community. From the time he was a student to the time of his passing, Dwight helped pave the way for all students at Wesleyan. His example of what liberal arts education fosters was dramatic. He possessed willingness, open-mindedness, intellect, and compassion. These assets served him well, and many others throughout his lifetime. And on top of that, he was just fun to be around, as evidenced by his hearty and his frequent laughter. This symposium provides an opportunity to learn about matters related to the African American experience, to network and to connect with each other, all of which Dwight was especially good at doing and ensures that diversity remains an important part of the Wesleyan experience. Educators like Krishna Winston, our moderator Yanira Montero, and our three panelists, Leah, Al, and Greg, exemplify the qualities and principles that Wesleyan was built upon and has prospered from for over 180 years. Without further ado, I present to you Professor of German Language and Literature and coordinator of the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, Dr. Krishna Winston.
Thank you, Janelle, and welcome to everybody. Welcome back to Wesleyan if you're coming back, and welcome to this event if you're here on campus all the time. It is a real joy and honor to introduce the moderator of today's Dwight Greene Symposium, my colleague, friend, and mentor, Dr. Yanira Montero. I have been limited as to the amount of time I can spend, so I'm not going to rehearse all the details of her career, but I want to give you a few basic facts. Yanira started as a faculty member at Wesleyan in Romance Languages. She and I had our children at just about the same time, and they were each other's first playmates, as we recalled earlier today, crawling around on a rug and not even able to interact yet. Yanira's talent and potential as an administrator was quickly recognized by the late Edgar Beckham, our now legendary dean of the college, and he plucked Yanira out of the faculty and made her a class dean, and then later dean of studies. With Edgar Beckham, Yanira was instrumental in bringing to Wesleyan the Mellon Minority Undergraduate Fellowship. This is a fellowship very small, very selective, that was designed back in the late '80s by the Mellon Foundation, and its purpose and mission was to remedy the shortage of faculty of color at U.S. colleges and universities. And very few schools were invited to join this fellowship. It was not something you could just apply for out of the blue. You had to be invited. And we were in the very second group of institutions who were invited and started our program in 1989. The program has now produced 14 Wesleyan PhDs. We have another 13 or 14 in the pipeline coming along, about 5 of them just about to finish their dissertations. We have two who are already tenured, one of whom is Bobby Donaldson. He's a charter member of the Wesleyan Board of Trustees, and we are immensely proud of all of them. After Edgar Beckham left Wesleyan, Janina became the acting dean of the college. This is a wonderful position that we no longer have and that we probably miss, most of us who knew what it was. And then after a national search, Janina was made no longer the acting, but the dean of the college. She left us all too soon, mindful of the need for seeking wider horizons. She went first to Princeton, then to Brown, and then finally to UCLA, where she is now Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and oversees a very large office and many, many responsibilities, including the Office of the Registrar, Residential Life, Admission, and Financial Aid. This is a public institution, as I'm sure you all know, which every fall welcomes well over 5,000 entering freshmen and thousands of transfer students. So compared to Wesleyan dimensions, this is an enormous responsibility. The most important thing that I think you need to know about Janina Montero is that she is not a person who seeks the limelight. She always works quietly and extremely purposefully behind the scenes. She is capable of focusing at once on individuals and on the larger context. She's an educator to the core, always mindful of what it takes for students to go through their various developmental stages, to go from being high school students to mature adults. And she's someone whose kindness, wisdom, and energy we were so lucky to benefit from for the years that we did, and she is truly the ideal person to moderate today's panel. Let me introduce Dr. Janina Montero.
Good afternoon. It's really wonderful to see you all. I'm going to keep the introductions short because you have a program that describes the background of the speakers. But I do want to say a couple of words. First of all, I don't think I've ever left Wesleyan. So it's been 17 years since I've been gone. And my connection to this institution is almost 40 years long. So I was a child when I came. That's not wrong. That's not but it is a long-standing, loving relationship with this institution, and I want to welcome the alumni, of course, but I want to also welcome the students and the parents. This is a fantastic institution with enormous richness and depth of knowledge, education, and civic engagement. And I am very, very proud of my time here. And in many ways, you're my family, you know, as in some ways, the speakers. So I'm going to ask the speakers to join me on the, at the, not exactly the podium, but close enough. And I will say a few words about them. Maybe I should sit down. Can I sit down if that works out? Okay. I will just want to quickly introduce them, and then we'll get started into the conversation. I'm very much hoping that the audience will have an opportunity to engage directly with the panelists. And I also think that this is an incredibly timely conversation. As Krishna indicated, I'm now in public education, and the support of public education is plummeting. So this is another important reason why many communities, especially communities that have, for one reason or another, been less supported, this is an incredible opportunity to maintain the commitment to education, whether it's secondary or certainly K-12, This is something that I see very dramatically played out in California, and I'm very honored to be with you, and I'm honored to be sitting with this wonderful panel. Professor Leah Wright is an assistant professor of history and African American studies at Wesleyan. She received her BA in history from Dartmouth and MA and PhD from Princeton. And her work is very interesting. And it has, and I was especially taken by the book that she's working on right now, The Loneliness of the Black Conservative, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power. As we see the national politics playing out, I think this is an especially interesting conversation. I don't know if you'll have an opportunity to raise the issue as we talk about your experience. Greg Baldwin is the principal and co-founder of the New Haven Academy, which opened in 2003 as a state-approved inter-district magnet school and part of the New Haven public school system. He is an innovator and a person of tremendous commitment to education and to the advancement of individual youngsters and the community, and I'm very, very honored to be with you. Alfred Young, class of '88, is the Arthur Thurneau Professor and Chair of Sociology at the University of Michigan. He also holds a joint appointment in the Center for African American and African Studies. I understand you're also chair of your department at the moment, and so he is moving into administration as we speak. I remember Alfred well from his time here at UCLA. He was spectacular then, as he's spectacular now, and the kind of work that he has produced makes us all very proud. So thank you all for being here, and if we can welcome them. All right, so let's start with a very important question for all of us in terms of how many of us work with young students who are considering colleges. How did you make your decision? How did you end up at Wesleyan? You can talk about another institution and we'll go quickly on that, but if you can talk about the decision-making process and how you got to it.
My decision-making was partly influenced by athletics. I was a football and lacrosse player. And I went to a private school, so it was ingrained for a long time that I was going to college. And what I found at Wesleyan when I came to visit was the only place I saw where if I couldn't play sports, I wanted to be and spend my time. I love the feel of the campus. I love the diversity I saw. And so it caught my attention in that way. So it was actually, although I was looking at schools based on athletics, this was the one I chose because I thought if I couldn't do it, this is where I wanted to spend my time.
And it was a good choice, right?
It was a great choice.
In my case, I was fortunate enough to be in a high school program sponsored by the Catholic Church in New York City, the Archbishop's Leadership Project, that sent a fair number of its members to Wesleyan. So I knew of Wesleyan by my junior year of high school, and actually spent a good part of my senior year trying to run away from Wesleyan. First time I visited, I loved it. And I thought, okay, there's something wrong here because I'm so in love with this place that I must not be thinking properly about schools. And so I tried to love Amherst and tried to love Brown, and by senior year, it just wasn't working. And it just felt like the right place for me. It seemed like a place that captured the best in intellectual challenge and the strongest commitment to people from underrepresented groups. And that's very much the kind of environment I want to be a part of.
Excellent. Leah?
I guess I can say a few words about how I chose Dartmouth.
Exactly, please.
I came from a household where education was always held up as the model, so there was no question about whether or not I would be going to college. And I think it's particularly important to mention that my mother went to college, but my father did not. So they were coming from two different perspectives about the meaning of education and the value of education. And actually, Dartmouth wasn't even on my list when I first started applying to schools. I wanted to go to UNC Chapel Hill. I was a diehard Tar Heel fan. I mean, that's where I was going. And it accidentally ended up on my list after a suggestion. And after going and kind of seeing and experiencing college life, I was sold. And I mean, I think Wesleyan had an advantage in that you guys are somewhat closer to cities. I was in Hanover, New Hampshire,
That's right, yeah.
4.5 hours away from New York City, 2.5 hours from Boston. So it was a little bit of an isolating experience, but I felt like I could concentrate while I was there, which was a good thing.
Let me ask you this: did you feel that you were prepared? What was the transition like in terms of your prior experience in high school and the demands of college? Did you feel that you were up for it?
I felt I was prepared specifically to write and to think and debate. When I got here, I was not prepared at all to really engage in rigorous study. It took me, I had a hard transition in that regard. I felt comfortable, I became an English major, I felt comfortable reading and writing and debating and discussing, but it took me a while to adjust to the rigors of really delving into studying and making a commitment in that way.
I guess for me, the greatest challenge was learning to think below the sort of surface of scholarship. I was well trained to read and respond and sort of, articulate what literature had been saying. But very early on, there were a number of Wesleyan professors that would say, formulate your own critique, formulate your own opinion that's sustained by scholarship. It took me a while to sort of get that and then get comfortable with that.
I was well prepared, I think, intellectually. Emotionally, I was not well prepared. And I think one thing I would be interested in this conversation is talking about how students can be very prepared when they come to college, but still the very experience of either being away from home, being in a new environment, being with a new group of people can be very traumatic. And at one point, I almost left my first year. But I think learning how to, pardon the cliche, work the system really helped me get through my time in college. So it was a little bit of an adjustment.
So what would you recommend you're talking to freshmen, to seniors in high school that are looking at different schools? What would you recommend? What would you suggest that they think about? How would they prepare, both academically or developmentally?
Oh, first of all, I think you've got to take seriously that the college experience is, the way I've described it over the years is, the first time to act like an adult, the last time to act like a child. And there's a nice balance in between the two. The first time to act like an adult means that you're in a situation that takes some risk, whether it's learning how to respond to scholarship in different kinds of ways, whether it's coming out of the box to people that you became close to in high school and learning to talk to and encounter different people and sometimes learn why you may disturb them, given your prior beliefs, your backgrounds. I think, though, learning how to have responsible fun is important, too. And it's often said in every institution, there's much that's learned in the cafeterias, in the classroom. I think at Wesleyan, that's particularly true. That there's something about the kind of people that come here that have so much more to share than just what their major is and what they're doing. And so to learn how to engage and learn from people in these different environments, I think is critical. So really have a little bit of patience with yourself, particularly patience in learning to stumble.
Yeah, I think...
you have a school, so...
Yeah, I have this conversation often.
Every day,
And it's interesting, it's a very different perspective. Much of my job is convincing kids that college is for them. It's a very different experience than I had, but that's what I spend a lot of time doing. I think a lesson that I learned here, and actually Meg Zacco helped me learn this freshman year, is that transition from high school to college, that college is for you in terms of what you want to pursue. No one is requiring it of you in the way that high school is required of you. You have to engage in it and figure out why am I there. And the other thing, and I talk to my students a lot about this, it's figuring out how to push yourself out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of the experience we have and a lot of experience my students have is that brand new experience, how to be ready for that, how to prepare for that is a huge element. my experience as an educator is that getting kids into college is actually easier than I thought. Keeping them there, in some of the ways you described, being able to manage once I'm there, and how do I bridge my adulthood and my childhood and be able to stay there, is something that we're working a lot on.
I have several pieces of advice, and I tell this to students now. The first piece is know that you are not alone. So oftentimes students, when they first get to college or when they're about to go to college, they're very good at disguising their loneliness or the kind of angst that they're going through. But the truth is most people in the freshman class are going through that exact same experience, whether it be emotional or intellectual. So know that you're not alone. The next part of that is learning how to talk to people, because everybody here wants you to succeed. So learning how to talk to your professors, learning how to talk to deans or administrators, learning how to talk to the people that run the fellowship programs, learning how to talk to people in your dorm that you otherwise may not be talking to. And then the last one, I think, is just a purely kind of practical one, which is time, and learning how to balance your time. High school is very structured, very, very structured. You get to college, someone says you have 4 classes, and you say, 4 classes, that's not a big deal. That's a lot of free time. But then you realize, oh, I have to study for class. I have to read. I have to do all of this stuff. I have to deal with my social life, because that's really important. So learning how to really manage your time, I think, is key to getting through that transition.
You know, as you were talking, it occurred to me, I think we talk about transition, that to a degree, the fact that transitions are difficult is not necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that it helps the student think about how they're making decisions, what are the issues, do they fit? I mean, there are a whole variety of identity questions or direction questions that if it was too easy, it may not be as productive in terms of their own development. And having said that, did you have trying experiences while you were in college? Did you have memorable successes? Can you talk a little bit about that? Sometimes success, you know, sometimes the best failures are could be a success as well. But
we only have an hour. How many? I think for me, in terms of a failure, I wouldn't call it a failure, but a real challenge.
a challenge.
Yeah. Came out of a part of what I said earlier. I'd come to Wesleyan quite literally having a very black-white reading of the world. I was very aware of social issues, very aware of issues concerning race, and kind of read everything through the situation of black people and the more powerful white people. And a number of encounters, some with faculty, some with students, I was made to think that gender matters, and that on the gender side, I'm at an advantage. And it was real interesting to sort of think, wait a minute, you know, I'm a part of somebody's problem.
Right.
And I can't say there was 1 or 2 sort of signature moments, but throughout the Wesleyan experience, time and time again, you know, folks said that. And I thought, I've got to think broader and think deeper. And you know, so a lot of moments that came together there were important. And in terms of real successes, it was an opportunity that I stumbled upon. It's a long story that I'll tell very briefly. As some alumni know, I spent a number of years doing a history of the African-American students at Wesleyan that I stumbled on by mistake. I was in the dorm room of another Wesleyan student, and he had all these bound copies of the school newspaper. I thought, is he making furniture? What, you know, what? He actually was beginning to document some of the history of black students. And I thought, this is fascinating. Let me get involved in this. And it's mistakenly understood that was my senior thesis. It wasn't. It was actually an extracurricular activity that I did for 3 of the 4 years that I was here. That was a marvelous opportunity to just sort of talk to people and get their stories and think about how you tell a story and what does it mean to do research. And even going through graduate school, I never had a moment of having that rich an intellectual experience. Sort of going out there and trying to tell a story about a period.
That's a great story.
My challenge was it was very academic. I felt my transition in my freshman year was a little bit too easy until December of '87. I actually got a call from Meg Zacco at home putting me on academic probation for the spring. But I mean, and I tell this story to students, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I would have muddled through Wesleyan with very poor grades and kind of made it by the skin of my teeth if that hadn't happened. It was a real look in the mirror moment of why am I doing this and why am I here? And for my parents, why are we paying for this if this is how you're treating it? This is your experience. So it really, I just wouldn't have been as successful if that hadn't happened. So it was really one of those moments where failure worked. I spent a lot of time weekly with Meg and then the other deans in the following years as I spent a lot of time on probation. But it was I never got below a B again, and I took it really seriously, and I thought, okay, how do I make this for me? And if I hadn't had that experience, I don't think it would happen. I think I would have found a way to coast. So it really became, that failure turned into success for me.
As I mentioned earlier, I almost left in the middle of my freshman year. I had the paperwork filled out. I had approval. I just remember this very vividly, sitting in the basement of an administrative building with the dean sitting across from me saying, and she said, are you sure you want to do this? And me saying, yes, I want to do this. And it was just the darkest, I think it was the darkest day of my college experience. I'd like to think of a saying that you don't really know necessarily what you have until your back is up against the wall. And in that moment, my back was not only up against the wall, it was digging through the wall, and it was, it was over. And then I talked to my parents who said, okay, we'll support you if you want to transfer, but if you want to stay and work through it, because we think you can work through it, we'll support you every step of the way. And I decided to stay. And I think that was a really transformative moment for me, because every moment after that, when I thought about giving up, I remembered back to sitting in that basement. And I said, okay, I can get through this. I can get through this. I will get through this. So I could talk, I think, about various successes, but I think even the ability to say that I graduated from Dartmouth College in 4 years, and I didn't quit, and I didn't transfer, was my success.
That's right. Interesting. And as you talk about those challenging moments, were there resources that you drew on? Was the institution helpful? Obviously Meg was instrumental, but besides that, besides the office and with those process, it's an important process. Were there other resources that you drew on that you could point to as important to your development while you were in school?
Not enough. I mean, I learned later that, Leah, you were speaking about learning how to talk. I mean, I didn't learn that well enough while I was here. So the dean's office was actually great and was the best source of support for me, as were actually the coaching staffs of I played football and lacrosse while I was here, and they were actually very helpful and instrumental in pulling me through. And other than that, one thing I do regret is I didn't take advantage of other resources. I didn't know how or where to look for other resources.
Yeah, the human resource capacity was strong here. I was always willing to talk to faculty. I remember going one day to Hubert O'Gorman's office of sociology, and I said, what is the sociology of knowledge? What does that mean? And we talked for an hour. Yeah. And I always had these moments I could just show up. I showed up in the office, various people, and just talk things out. And it made me, now that I'm in the professional capacity in academia, I realize that there are very few people that are willing or even able to give time to students that just have questions on the top of their heads. But there were all kinds of people. Edgar Beckham, Mike Young, right. Various faculty. I would just show up and say, I'm curious about something, can we talk? And it happened. Right. And that was a particular Wesleyan attribute that I cherish.
After that experience, I learned how to take advantage of the system. And I was one of those students who would pop into professor's office, dean's office, the president's office, because the president has office hours, which I learned. So always asking questions, running ideas by people, and that's how I learned about other opportunities. So I learned about the Mellon Fellowship because I walked into a dean's office and I said, I have all these really great ideas and I can't do it in the classroom. They said, well, have you thought about the Mellon Fellowship? And I said, what's that? So I think having all of those resources and then being willing to ask questions, because I think at that point I said, I don't have anything to lose except maybe my pride, but again, nothing to lose, so why not ask the questions?
Right. Now, it's very interesting to hear your perspective in terms of how well you were able to actually use the institution for your own development. And at what point, or did it happen while you were an undergraduate, or did it happen later that you decided that I'm going to be an educator? At what point did that process become conscious? At what point did you say, this is my direction?
Crystal clear for me, junior year at Wesleyan. And I've got to step back and say, I came to Wesleyan initially intent on becoming a civil rights attorney. Some folks in the audience know Ted Shaw, well-regarded alum, who was a personal friend. I knew him before I heard of Wesleyan. And by freshman year, I knew I was going to be the next Ted Shaw. That was my goal in life. So I wasn't trying to find myself at Wesleyan. I had one job, one agency I was going to work for. And then through a couple of years at Wesleyan, I thought, wow, these folks research and they write and they teach and they think and they get paid. And by junior year, I said, this is something I got to think about and pursue. And I remember vividly going into then professor of government, Jerry Watts' office, and saying, what's this job all about? One of these, step in and talk to me. What is this all about? And that conversation was repeated by several others with many other people, trying to get a grip on what academia was all about, and it just reinforced this notion that I wanted to do this. I wanted to be someone that researched issues and thought about issues and taught issues. And I still did a Wesleyan-sponsored fellowship before my senior year at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, trying to make sure the law thing was settled. And by the time I finished it, I thought lawyers need more exposure to research. So it was clear to me that after Wesleyan, I was going to go on and get a PhD and be a professor.
And so you understood at that point and in that field, and in sociology? Or?
I still had to think, because I actually applied in 4 different fields,
yes.
Psychology, sociology, American studies, and American history. I always wanted to be a researcher. I was never committed to being a sociologist. And ultimately, sociology to me became the widest window in all the other fields. So that's why I pursued it. But again, just informed by a lot of people, constant conversations.
I came back to the idea. My parents had always told me, oh, you're going to be a teacher. My parents were involved in education, and so of course I didn't want to do it for a long time. I came here with the idea of majoring in sociology, actually, and then in intro sociology. I hit a roadblock of Weber and Engels and all that. I couldn't get through it. But 2 things. One, athletics. The work I started to do late in high school and through college was working with younger kids in sports. And that was one thing. And then I took a class here, I think I was a junior, Education in the Urban Poor with Hazel Carby, and that just like, boom, something hit me. And I said, whoa, okay, I could do this, actually. And so then I just decided to pursue teaching and talk to a lot of people about how best to do that and how to really make a commitment to it. I graduated just as Teach for America was maybe a year or 2 old at that time, and that was the hot thing. And I talked to people who said, do you want to teach? I said, yes. And they said, do you want to learn how to teach? I said, yes. And they gave me a lot of suggestions to really make that long-term commitment. So I didn't go the TFA route, I went another route, and it worked. But I guess it was those 2 things. That Education in the Urban Poor class I took was kind of a light bulb, the only light bulb moment I really had.
Through Mellon, I was exposed to a lot of what higher education or what graduate school would be like. And that's when I really started thinking about what would a career in education or what would a career in academia look like. But even while I was in graduate school, at least in the early phase of graduate school, I was still saying, well, I don't know what it means to be in graduate school. I knew I wanted to be there because the idea of sitting, researching, discussing ideas, discussing them in big ways and exciting and new ways was what I wanted to do. I just wasn't sure which path was right for me. And even actually, in my second year of graduate school, I almost took a job with the CIA because it seemed like a path that would allow me to do that kind of thing. And then I realized, no, that actually was not the path for me. But I always tell people that I think I came around to academia when I realized this was what I was passionate about, that I could actually talk through and think through and analyze ideas and then convey those ideas and dialogue those ideas with other people for the rest of my life, and people would pay me to do it. So
How cool
why
is
not?
that?
That is very cool. So I think that's what really pushed me over the cliff.
I'm going to change a little bit from this from the questions that we had prepared, but I'm sure you understand how important it is to have all of you in front of a classroom. You know, I mean, it's just in terms of who you are, what you think about, and the community you represent. I mean, there's no question in terms of how meaningful it is for the students in your class, regardless of what their background is. So it's a way of really redefining communities and who individuals are and contributions to education. How do you personally negotiate that with your class, with your classes, with your students? How do you feel it or encounter it? How do you encounter it often? Do you encounter it sporadically? How does it come up?
All the time and in many ways. Sometimes positive, sometimes not so positive. I take very seriously that there are very few people like me in the academy. And I'm especially charged by that. And it excites me to do the work that I do because of that. And what it means is different things for different audiences. So quite literally, being at the University of Michigan, being at the public institution close to Detroit, there were a lot of Detroit-based students that sort of said, oh, wow, somebody who looks like me is there. And they just literally didn't expect that to happen. Right? Didn't think that could happen. And there are ways of connecting with those students that help build that point of connection from that very distant place that's not far from Michigan, but culturally worlds apart. On the other hand, there are people that often see me as just an advocate. And so there's this sense of, before I begin making a statement, well, I know what you're going to say. Well, how could you? You never met me. But there's oftentimes a very clear reading of African Americans, especially for people of color more generally in the academy, as having a sort of single line, a single argument. There are also moments when people ask about credentials. So I'm still asked today, oh, so you have a PhD? Every faculty member in Michigan does, yes. And so, you know, this sense that people either don't believe, you know.
How about your birth? Never mind.
And yeah, you know, I've gotten beyond the point of being frustrated by this. And that doesn't mean I accept it. But that's just another arena by which I've got to engage folks and deal with folks, and I'll just go to work and do that.
I think I'm thinking of two ends of the spectrum. When I first started teaching in a private school in Baltimore right out of college. And for an elite private school, it had a pretty high percentage of African American students who complained to me instantly when I got there. Well, they just hired you because we complained. And I said, well, I'm here, aren't I? And you know, let's do something now together. And I learned, in that experience, I learned, it was kind of my first exposure to realizing that I did represent something more than, you know, who I was and what I was doing. And it was an interesting experience on that end. On the other end now, I mean, I work with kids, and it's interesting. I went to a private school where from first grade on, of course I was going to college, and I rebelled against the kind of college pressure cooker of where you're going to go and what are you going to do. But what I spend my days doing is convincing every kid that I work with, of course you can go to college. And my job is to show you how and look. And I just am naturally kind of in that position. And I guess I kind of take it for granted now because I've been in it for so long, but I realize I am a symbol and a reality at the same time. I'm a symbol of what they can do. And then we talk about, I mean, I think it's really interesting. It's fascinating that the kids that I work with need to be convinced that they could go to college. It's just interesting. I mean, I spend a lot of time, a lot of it is that, of course you can. So we actually require it at my school. Kids have to get into college. That's part of how we work with them and part of how we convey that sense of expectation. We kind of build it into the daily routine.
I think it is very important for me to be in the classroom, and I'm not saying that because I'm biased, but because as a woman of color, as a black woman, We're relatively rare in the academy, and I think it's important for not only students, but other faculty members, administrators, to see me in the classroom. I also think it's important because I am an advocate for students. I think every student who walks into my classroom is going to succeed and will succeed, and I will fight, even if I fight harder than they will, to see them succeed. I think the flip side of that is it can be exhausting. And it can be exhausting when, I think when you have all of these other pressures on you and you're trying to commit 150% to each one of those pressures. And some pressures have bigger pushes or bigger forces behind them. So a lot of this is about finding the balance and then figuring out what are the smartest ways that you can advocate and help your students within those circumstances.
So the follow-up question is every educator a mentor? I have a different point of view. But how do you see that? Is that an obligation? Does it come with the territory? Mm-hmm. Are you obligated to do it and to do it well? Do you mentor just by being there?
I have very strong views on this, so
maybe
I'll wait. Maybe
Go
I'll wait.
ahead, go ahead.
Go right ahead, you're there. Let's change the pattern.
Okay, I do not think that every educator is a mentor, and I don't think that we just should assume that everyone is a mentor. The best piece of advice that I got in graduate school was that you need to realize that people do different things for you in your life. So don't assume that because somebody is teaching you in a classroom that they're going to be a mentor and an advocate for you. You need to figure out who's going to be your mentor and who's going to be your advocate. No, in my perspective, I do think I have a responsibility to be a mentor. And I think I have a responsibility because I was mentored, because this is why I'm sitting in the seat on the stage today. So this is where the fuzzy lines come in, but I think the faster that students figure out who's going to be a mentor for me, who's going to be an educator, who's going to do both, who's going to advocate for me, the faster they're going to see the kind of success and the kind of goals that they want to see through a university setting.
Excellent.
I'm going to step back and be a true sociologist for a minute now in answering that. What fascinates me about how people often talk about their experiences in education, particularly people that have gone to great places like Wesleyan, is you sort of ask them, well, how'd you get here? And so often you hear, well, I worked hard. And I get that, but I've never heard, upon pushing people to explain their stories, anyone say something other than someone connected me to some resource, some possibility, some opportunity. So people have helped everybody irrespective of talent. Hence, I think anyone that thinks seriously about being in education has got to think about mentoring seriously. It may not be in the formal capacity, but I don't think anyone's ever done it alone. Right? Or at least I haven't heard that person yet. And so you either decide to seriously act upon that on the behalf of other people because it's happened to you, or in some ways you're not being as responsible as I think you should be as a citizen in an educational institution.
Interesting.
I mean, at the high school level, the way I talk to teachers about it, everyone, whether you're a mentor, you're an example, and you're being watched for how you handle yourself all the time. So whether you are actually actively mentoring or not, you're really teaching that. I mean, we try to set it up so that people can find at least one adult that becomes that really active mentor. But I think, at my level, I think it's incumbent on everyone to take that role when they can. And
with having said that, I want to open the conversation to everybody in the audience. I think it's a very interesting moment here to talk in terms of being an educator and mentoring and where you are and what questions you want to answer. Yes, sir. Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Listen to Bill Milliken, who is a legendary educator this week at a kind of a conference. And he was talking about issues around, particularly the high school level. I'll be curious what Greg says, but also the other two panelists. The third wing of this, pedagogy and whatnot, is the mentoring or the cultivation of the parents of these children. And I'd be curious from Greg's point of view, having seen a private school and a public school, what is the role, or how do you get these parents engaged in the process? We're all parents here. I've got kids out of school, but that really have pushed and promoted that, but too often there's a huge gap.
It's a large question. It's also developmental at the high school level. If you think back to when you were 15, how much time did you want to spend with your parents being involved in your day-to-day life? But it becomes complicated when we're talking about access to resources and understanding how systems work and where you're going. So it's a real challenge. I mean, I'm not going to blame parents for what's happening with their kids in total, but I'm going to invite them in. We have a parent coordinator on staff. We have a parent room. We make every opportunity to get parents involved in not just the decision-making of the school, but the academic life of the school. We do classes and things like that for parents. It's a real challenge, but my experience has been most parents want a lot for their kids. Most kids, every kid I've met wants to be successful, and the gap is about helping them learn how. So I try not to take the pejorative angle, not that I heard it in your question, but I'm not going to blame parents who don't know how to help their kids, because that doesn't mean they don't want it. We're going to take it as an opportunity to try to teach them. We keep it small so that we can try to get to know both the parents and the kids, and that helps us in our community try to make some strides.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Evans Jacobs, class of 73. I live nearby, and I have returned to Wesleyan many times for different occasions, and have had lots of opportunities to talk to students. A trend that I have noticed is that a lot of students over the years have said to me, when I graduate, I'm done, or I can't wait to graduate. And that's so different from back when I was in school. We almost always thought it was important to go to graduate school. And I'm wondering if you encounter that, or if you find it more difficult to get college students to think beyond college.
Thank you.
Well, I can say, I'll speak personally, then as a historian. Personally, I would love to see students go beyond. And I do think that there are a significant number of students who do go on to pursue law school, who go to med school, either not maybe immediately, but in a couple of years, and some who pursue graduate school. I think Chronicle of Higher Education has actually said in the past couple of years, the numbers for graduate school have actually skyrocketed, which actually may be part of this recession. Mm-hmm. So I think students do want to go. Now the historian part is sometimes they don't have the resources to go. And I think one of the remarkable things that I've seen in the past couple of years is that at schools where students come out loan-free or debt-free, because they're debt-free loans, they continue on with their education at a much higher rate because there are less implications, economic implications. They have the freedom to pursue higher education or further education. So I think that maybe some of the conversations that you have may be actually a consequence of this idea of, what are the implications, what is the reality of my situation, and what is the institutional framework in which I have to work.
Yeah, really briefly, it doesn't discount anything that said. I want to add a slightly different perspective that addresses two, I think, distinct forces that affect that outcome, and I see it quite a bit. On the one hand, for a lot of privileged young folks, right, the intense competition they experience from first grade through the end of high school leads to burnout. I mean, kids today from privileged backgrounds are going to elementary schools on the basis of what the college matriculation patterns are for those schools. I hear a lot of kids say by senior year of college, I've had enough, I got to step back. Right? So that's some of what I think drives that. On the other hand, in terms of low-income families, there's such a gap now between the experiences they have and the culture of higher education that just getting there is a big challenge. Right? If you take your average low-income urban community today, right, you'd be hard-pressed to find a college graduate in those communities. And I study them, I know. Right. Right? So making that leap is harder than it ever was in your era and my era.
Hola, Janina.
Hola.
Madeline Colon. I want to thank the panel. I'm Madeline Colon, and I won't wear that name tag because it has a date on it. I cannot deal with the date. I just can't do it. But I want to thank the panel for that question about mentorship and education. And I want to use you, Janina, as really the motto for my response to it, and to tell you that for generations of Latina women, and for me as a Puerto Rican woman at Wesleyan, without both, I don't think we would have made it here, without the fact that for us, you represented both. You represented the high intellect, you know, the model of the academic that really responded to our intellectual curiosity and our appetite and our potential, but you also provided that tremendous, tremendous emotional support and the mentorship. And I think that really without that, I don't think I would have made it here. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. Marina Melendez, class of 1983. Let it go, girl. Let it go. I'm also a class dean for 2014 here at Wesleyan. I want to thank you all for being here. It's really wonderful you're here. These are controversial times in education in the United States, and I wanted to hear from you about the controversy and the dilemma that's going on in public schools. And what you see, I know we don't have enough time to hear solutions and fixes, but it's important to hear your perspectives. The role that academia has with public school education and in mentoring our public school students to transition to, you know, some of the worlds like Wesleyan, which are extremely elite and upper crust of this nation. And so where do you see academia in sort of this controversial issue that we have with public education in our country?
Greg, I'm going to.
Sure. My philosophy at our school, our philosophy, and this grows out of a huge network of schools, the Coalition of Essential Schools, our primary job is to teach kids to think critically and to use their minds well to develop and defend ideas using evidence to really dig in. And at the public school level, there's not a lot of support for that in terms of state testing and other things. One of the things that we're doing is partnering with Community College, Gateway Community College, and Quinnipiac University, and we're starting conversations about alignment. What are we doing, and what are our expectations? What are your expectations from the other end in terms of what's happening on campus? It's been a really interesting conversation to have. I think there's a real disconnect between what a place like Wesleyan wants out of a incoming student and what many public schools are producing. And let alone, not even talking about the disconnect in background and socioeconomic background and otherwise, but in terms of how school is structured and what schools ask of students. That gap is gigantic, and I think by and large, with some exceptions, growing larger. So I think it's finding school. I would hope Wesleyan is having conversations with Middletown High School and other schools in the area, finding people to have that conversation, being part of that conversation, talking about that alignment. I think it's really key. We also look for early college opportunities, kids seeing themselves on campus while they're in high school and being part of that. We have mentored and supportive ways to get kids on campus, and that's been really fruitful in getting kids to see psychologically, I can make it here and I can be part of this community before they take that huge leap after they leave. So I think there's a great opportunity for schools like Wesleyan to make those local connections, and then that can help them think broadly about kids coming from all over the place.
If I can add to that, given that I work in a public institution now, at UCLA we're working in the early academic outreach program in 82 schools. We used to be in 95 schools, where what we try to do is develop a college-going culture. I don't know how much you know about Los Angeles, but the LAUSD is a disaster. It's a growing disaster because of the lack of resources in these institutions. So, for example, early academic outreach used to be funded at double the level that is funded now, in part because the state is not supporting it. I think there is a tremendous obligation for higher education to assist, guide, and share resources with K-12. I think that we're losing entire generations of young men and women because the schools just don't serve them, don't serve their diversity, don't serve where they are as socioeconomically, and where they are in terms of the capacity to achieve the American dream, if you will. So it's a very difficult. And if you look at New Haven schools, is another just down the street. It's another place where we know that there are tremendous challenges. There are several hands over there that have been trying.
I've got, I'm Woody Exley. I got my Master of Arts in Liberal Studies here in 1992, so that means I'm a certified liberal. And only 7% of the public school teachers in Connecticut are people of color. And I was wondering if you could talk, based on your personal experience, how students would be better off with more people of color in the teaching profession.
Well, I mean, it's, we talked about mentoring and examples and models. I can tell you other stories later about why the percentage is so low. I mean, there are hurdles that are unnecessary and a little bit strange in the certification process in many places. But I just think it's one of the greatest benefits is that having that example there. And you have to make a commitment to, on my side, I have to make a commitment to finding those people and helping to shepherd people through the process so that they can become those mentors.
Hi, I'm Robin Kelly. I have a daughter here, class 2012. I just wanted to ask a question, I guess, to all the panelists about the elephant in the room race, specifically things like affirmative action, for example, that hasn't really been talked about. It's one of the ways that a lot of us, like myself, were able to attend a university. Specifically, I was wondering if you could talk about what it means in this particular moment, which has been identified as a quote-unquote post-racial moment, when things like affirmative action or programs like Mellon, for example, are kind of under assault, saying that we don't really need those programs anymore. And in fact, what's interesting is that of the two faculty who were mentioned who had an impact on two of you on the panel, both were black, Hazel Carby, Jerry Watts. In other words, here we are at a moment when I think 47% of black students are not even graduated from high school, let alone the fact that Wesleyan may be an exception with a 90% graduation rate for blacks, but most places for black males it's 35%, for black females 42%. So let's talk about the kind of challenges for students of color, or are there still challenges? Or do you think that we've kind of solved all those problems now? We don't really need programs like some form of affirmative action, some form of dealing with the question of inequality and experience for students of color.
I can start if you let me for a quick second, because I come from a state where Proposition 209 eliminated affirmative action probably at the beginning, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It has been devastating. I can assure you that it's a devastating direction. It was devastating for the state, it's devastating for communities, and it has been devastating for the University of California institutions that are not allowed to consider that level of, that aspect of the experience in the admissions process. So having said that, I'm going to turn to the experts.
I'll say very quickly, you had a couple questions in a large question. First, I do not accept that we're in a post-racial society by any means. That's a nice discursive technique that's used to dismiss the fact that race still matters in so many ways.
Right.
Second, how do you confront that? I think there are a lot of things you got to realize that, I know you realize them, people in general have to realize that, about what the effect of the proposition in California, what's happened in Michigan, we've got sort of parallel situations, what's happening more generally, that makes it impossible to even raise race as an issue to talk about. It's almost against the law. In Michigan, it is against the law. But in a social sense, it's against the law to talk about race anymore, right? And so you in essence, gotta disturb people and raise the question. I don't think there's a neat and simple intellectual way of doing this, right? You've got to make noise, and in some ways you can point to research, and in many ways you can point to realities of what's happening in various segments of American life that are distinctly racial. Right? You also got to come up with creative strategies. A very particular one that we use at Michigan is, this time last week, I was meeting with the Alumni Council of the University of Michigan. The faculty, the black faculty, informed them that you should give your money to your own entities to create scholarships for black students. You give it to Michigan because the state school, we can't parse it out by race. But you as an independent entity can. That's one example of a series of creative steps folks who care have got to take to circumvent what have become significant changes in how business is done around race and access.
It's a large issue. It's many hours of conversation.
I was just going to add one thing, and I think this is, the other points have been touched on. I was actually going to just mention the idea about who's in the classroom and bringing students into the classroom. I mean, NSF just released this huge study about black students in STEM fields, STEM majors, that if you have black professors, your retention rate shoots up for black students. So there you go, right there. I mean, there's an actual practical kind of tie to this thing. And it's not just, I mean, STEM fields, I think, is the most glaring example, but there are other examples that we can point to, I think, and how this operates. One thing that I would just want to ask, or actually challenge the people in this room to, is to have honest conversations and uncomfortable conversations about race in public. Because oftentimes I think what happens is that we end up preaching to the choir. So we end up sitting in a room full of like-minded people who say, oh yeah, we do need affirmative action. Oh yeah, we need affirmative action. And then people who believe that we don't need affirmative action sit around a room with a bunch of people who say we don't. And we don't really talk to each other. And I think sometimes when we have those really difficult, ugly, messy conversations, good things can come out of them, even if it's just a kind of enlightenment.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dina Wallerson, class
Yes,
of
you
'82. I'm at the Posse Foundation in New York, and I'd be curious, thank you, I'd be curious to hear from you, given your own experiences, how do you message to your students the ongoing importance of entering into the education field and being the next generation of educators, given the economy, given the challenge of higher ed in America and the quality of the American education system so far?
One thing I'll say, thumbs up to Posse. I taught in New York City when Posse started. It was at the Institute for Collaborative Education. We got a bunch of kids through it. It's an outstanding program. I mean, we've been, my first graduating class is just graduated from college, so they haven't been able to, they're just starting to enter the field, but anecdotally, a bunch of them are interested in teaching based on how they were taught. I mean, I think we are explicit about it at our school, about the need to really push that and get over and get there. But we start with, and I said this earlier, but I think it can't be said enough. I think the challenge where race and class and economic status intersect, our first job is, I spend a lot of time convincing kids that they can go and succeed in college. One other note on the previous question. I mean, I had a student of mine apply to Wesleyan last year, and the very nice kind of form rejection email that she got, what it listed, I mean, the average SAT scores, the average AP classes, I mean, it's just a different world than my kids have access to. And it's a real question. I mean, and Wesleyan is progressive and does a great job, but it's a different world than kids have access to. They don't have access to it. Even when we work hard with them for 4 years, they don't necessarily have access to it. It's that funnel. A couple of them squeak through, but it's a real challenge. So our first goal is to say, hey, we expect you to go to college, and if you have to start at 2-year, that's fine, and then you're going to go to 4-year. But one of the things that when we engage kids in this critical thinking exercise and we engage them in making school really meaningful, a lot of them are interested in it as a real pursuit. If we can avoid the numbers game that public school becomes to pass whatever version of whatever state standardized test you have to do, then we can excite kids about it. But it takes a long time to do that.
Hi, Bob Miller, Wesleyan parent. I'd be interested to hear, you've talked about convincing kids that they can go. I'd be interested to hear how you convince them why they should go and what resonates with them. That's to higher education.
I'll say two things quickly. One is, for us at New Haven Academy, college is both a real and realistic goal, but it's also a metaphor, and it's a metaphor for being independent, responsible, thinking about choices you want to make for yourself and for your future. It's not so that what I want for kids is what many of us got based on where we came from and what we had, which was college was a real choice. And if we decided to avoid college or go somewhere else, it was an informed choice, and we made a clear decision. It wasn't something that was held from us. So that's what I want for kids. It's a real choice. And if you want to be, we can do the statistics, which we do, which is, the average salary of someone with a college degree versus a graduate degree versus a high school diploma. We do that, but that's the surface. Underneath it, it's about being responsible, being thoughtful, being what we call an active citizen, and those kind of things. So we frame it that way. So it's both a realistic thing that they have to work on, but it's also this metaphor for how to take responsibility for yourself and your community.
We're a little past the time, but we should we say 3 more questions, 2 more questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Shantanese. I'm a junior here at Wesleyan. I'm also a Mellon Fellow. Sorry, I'm really nervous. Robin Kelly's here. Okay, so being a Mellon Fellow, we're often told, to think about life in academia and being an African American or a minority at all in academia. So I'm just wondering, being that it is limited in academia and that you tend to be get more pressure from students because you are not singled out, but like you have this particular position. Do you find that handling that on one hand, and then also handling how to get tenured and putting out work, so handling those 2 things, being a mentor to students while also trying to maintain your own work from the institution? And then in that case, does that mean that the institution should be changed as far as this pressure that's coming down on professors that's then being pushed down to students, being that you may not have enough time to mentor or whatever it may be? So do you find that, how do you find handling that, and then also does that mean that the institution and the way in which professors get tenured should change?
So make sure you give an uplifting answer, because we want to make sure that she stays motivated and, you're...
Well, I guess I'll speak delicately.
In that context.
In this context here, there's a lot of pressure. And I think, the expectations, the university is great, I think, about giving very clear expectations of what they want to see for tenure. And actually, to a certain extent, mentoring does count into that. So that is taken into account, and I think that's incredibly valuable, and that's something that Wesleyan does that a lot of other universities don't do. So that's, I think, both rare and a great thing. I think there are a number of things that Wesleyan can do, and other universities can do to kind of alleviate some of that pressure. First and foremost, hiring more faculty of color, retaining faculty of color. And I think those are the two really big issues that the academy has to face. Not only that, there was just another study that showed for those faculty of color that get past the tenure stage, they actually stick or get stagnant in the associate stage, so they never make it to full professor. So that has implications in terms of the amount of freedom that you have, the amount of time that you have, the amount of money that you're able to do. So I think investigating what it is that allows or doesn't allow some professors to thrive and allows others to thrive. So I think really placing much more emphasis on bringing faculty of color in and bringing in faculty of color who have a commitment to mentoring and scholarship, and then retaining them should be kind of a key focus in terms of how an institution like Wesleyan works.
And I'll just say briefly, in terms of the uplift, and this may sound a little strange initially, but just hear me out. I do accept that there's tremendous pressure in the lives we lead as professors. But one of the things I think about all the time is the pressure I face any greater or anything like what Medgar Evers faced? What Malcolm and Martin? No, right? No one's trying to assassinate me, at least that I know of. Right? And so, you know, my work is easier than some other folks that were about change and transformation. And so I don't always buy into the notion that it's insurmountable. It's pressure-filled, but it's also in some ways a very pleasurable and controlled life. Right? I decide what I want to teach, what I want to do. Now that I'm a department chair, I can recruit who I want to recruit. Right? And I don't make all the political choices that didn't make today, in the past the way I make them today, right? So one's got to have a sense of patience about their career. But first and foremost, anyone that's about trying to change the status quo is going to face pressure. Right? In academia, you've got the luxury of being in a safer place of doing that than some other folks of color have. And that makes it easy for me.
One more.
It's a lot of pressure. How you doing? My name is Tito. I'm a class of 2007. And I'm currently a third-year doctoral student in a sociology program. I'm also a Mellon Fellow, so shout out to all the Mellon Fellows. Once you finish Wesleyan, you can go on to do the PhD. It happens. But what Wesleyan didn't prepare me for, or what I felt like they didn't, and Mellon tries, is that students of color at Wesleyan have a really strong network, right? And we, when we're here, in a lot of ways run a lot, right? We have organizations and things that really are important to us as students. When you get to graduate school, it's a whole different ballgame in that you really become the only one, right? I mean, and so you know that going there, like there really aren't going to be a lot of students of color, but you don't know until you get there how isolating it is. And graduate school, especially PhD programs, are already isolating as it is. But being a student of color in these programs adds a whole other element of pressure. And so I think practically, I think for my own sanity and for others, I want to know kind of what were some of your strategies in dealing with that as a student of color in a PhD program in graduate school, being one of the few, and motivating yourself to know that you can do it and you will finish. Because I think at some point all of us had said, well, we can't do this or it's insurmountable. And so what were some of the ways you kind of handled that? And what are ways that institutions like Wesleyan can work with students of color who are on that track, who say, well, I would like to go to graduate school, to kind of help better prepare them for what that's going to be like? Because unfortunately, you will be the only one or one of the only ones there. So yeah.
Well, to the last part of your question, a way that Wesleyan can prepare the students, I think, is by establishing a formal network, a formal mentoring network between alumni of color and students. So students are interested, graduate students or kind of faculty or professionals, what have you, are interested. And I don't think this just goes for, say, graduate school. I think this should be a wider thing and formalize it. To the other half, I think one of the things that I did to go through graduate school, because I also had a very lonely, isolating experience that I was not prepared for in that sense, was to replicate a lot of the structures that I had in undergraduate in graduate school. So I became president of the Black Graduate Caucus while I was at Princeton, and we revived it, and we really brought it back to life and had a very active presence on campus. Towards the end of my career, I felt like women of color were not being given their fair share. So we established a Women of Color Collective, and we got funding from the dean, and we held events, and we held kind of informal writing sessions. And I think that was really helpful. I also took part in writing groups. And I think one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn in graduate school was that I couldn't simply rely on those same replicated networks that I had in undergrad, those students of color. I had to learn how to use non-students of color in the same way. So my current writing partner, the person that I talk to every other day, is a white guy from Philadelphia who writes on very similar things. And he has been one of my greatest assets in the past 6 years. So I think learning how to, again, maybe this is another way of saying it, is to work the system and to find the things that are concrete and that will help you get through that very difficult process.
The only thing I'll say, I would have said the exact same thing, is that when you do this border outreach, right, people in other programs, other schools, they're feeling just the way you are. So ironically, it becomes a little easier to build these networks with folks of color because they're that hungry to connect with you too. So think beyond your discipline, think beyond your institution. Find opportunities to talk and develop ties with people.
I will also say, and maybe this is partial to Mellon Fellows, go to the conferences, because you will meet other graduate students and you will stay in contact with those graduate students and you will get together and you guys will talk through a lot of those things. They have professionalization programs. And it's not just Mellon, there's also Ford, there's Javits, there's McNair. There are programs in place, I think, that are designed to overcome a lot of these isolation and loneliness issues.
And some of the organizations like Posse or Jackie Robinson are pushing now into the graduate area. So there are opportunities. And on the topic of opportunity, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I especially want to thank the panel. It's been a tremendous opportunity for me to sit with you.
Thank you again so much to our panelists, to our moderator, Dr. Yanira Montero. And before we close out, I just wanted to give an opportunity. There was a comment. Dr. Krishna Winston did have a comment that she did want to make.
Yes.
My thanks to the panel. This was fabulous. The poet Billy Collins once said that his family had developed a saying, which was carpe podium. So I'm going to take advantage of being here to put in a plug for the Hewlett Diversity Archive that we have in the Special Collections and Archives. You heard that Al Young wrote a history of black students at Wesleyan. That was quite a few years ago. And then in the early 90s, we got funding from the Hewlett Foundation to have a fairly elaborate project that involved writing the history of Wesleyan's commitment to racial diversity. And out of that came a collection that's in Special Collections and Archives. It needs to be a growing, changing collection. And so those of you who are alumni and those of you who are current students of color, I would like to invite you to contribute pictures, memories, recordings, anything that you have that is part of the history of Wesleyan's commitment to racial and ethnic diversity. You can see me during the reception, or you can simply write to the University Archives and Special Collections. Send us your stuff. We would love to have it, and I hope that this will be a continuing and growing collection for current students to use and for alumni to come back to, and it's a very important part of Wesleyan's role in higher education. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. guys were fabulous.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. Once again, before we all leave, I just wanted to also thank the University Relations. Thank you to Greg Bernard, Meg Zacco, Sonia Magnon, President Michael Roth, and everyone that went into making this event such a success. Once again, panelists, you were wonderful. Thank you so much. And please join us. There was a comment made about networking with alumni. There is a reception immediately following this with alumni of color. It is a great opportunity. Wanted to take an opportunity to mention that we are actively organizing and doing that. Thank you so much again.